Hello, everyone. Saturday, March 16th, 2019. We welcome you all to our Bible study this morning. Glad you could come. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And we've all agreed it's a beautiful sunny day. Okay, and Thomas is our moderator. Thomas from New York.
Hello. So our text started out today. I'll read that. With the reading of her textbook, Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures, Mrs. Eddy insisted that her students make every day a prayerful study of the Bible and obtain the spiritual understanding of its promises. Upon this, she founded the future growth of her church. So that's from the annual meeting of June 12, 1906 in Miscellany.
Amen.
Wonderful. So is everyone doing it?
Good.
Uh-oh.
I think it's interesting. I just noticed she said a prayerful study. She doesn't say just read it.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to say that, prayerful study.
Well, she says it's the inspired word of the Bible, right? It leads to eternal life. Sufficient guide. So the Bible contains everything we need if we read it prayerfully, study it prayerfully. And as soon as we take it out of the schools, well, schools are in trouble.
And the other source of trouble is to interpret it literally, not prayerfully. Because people have done some very damaging things by quoting and using the literal sense of the word instead of the prayerful sense of what it really means.
Well, it's something I'm sure I can do better at. We can all do, and it's one of the reasons I'm grateful for these Bible study times, because it requires that we do take parts of the Bible and just spend good amounts of time prayerfully studying it.
And as we've been taught here, we ask God to show us before we even open the books His understanding. Ask Him to show us the truth and what He wants us to know and do.
Yeah, thank
Yep.
you.
And if we get in the habit of asking Him what to do every minute of every day, that just comes naturally, doesn't it?
More and more.
More and more.
And it is wonderful. I'm sure you all hear the letters and emails we get. People just so grateful for the Bible study. And it is different than any other Bible study. Not that I've ever attended any others, but people tell me that it's very different. And that's a good thing, it sounds like. So.
I like the reference to spiritual understanding of the Bible's promises, because I feel these promises are very comforting. All that in Isaiah, so many. I mean, it just affirms what God is here, He has promised, and He doesn't fail.
Thank you.
Thank you. It really is, isn't it? It's encouraging, it's comforting. It also arms us with what we need to defeat erroneous beliefs. When we take these promises to heart and recognize that they're not the same as human promises. These are actual law that govern the universe. There's a law behind these promises that never, ever fails.
I think the material understanding of the promises is what gives the idea of like, ashes to ashes or burning in a literal hell or things like that. Or that we have to go to war to perpetuate Christianity.
Yep, all of those wrong concepts.
And I love that hymn that says, His promises are kept. So, yes, these promises are kept. They're not idle or vain promises. God's promises are kept. So that's a very excellent quote, Thomas. And upon this she founded the future growth of her church. So, no growth? What does that mean?
Doing it right.
No prayerful study of the Bible.
We're not doing what we should do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Every day, prayerful study of the Bible.
Advancing in understanding.
Okay.
Now, which the Bible's lesson talks about this week. If we are doing certain things, we are advancing spiritually.
Yes. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating quote. So we'd actually used it before, and so I think it really gets the heart of what we do on Saturday mornings. So our topic today is, from our lesson, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That's in Matthew 6, verse 21. So we're taking this from the lesson this week. We've got a story from Elijah and another story from Elisha, and then a few other readings which we'll get into, which I think are interesting. But going with the first question about what are interesting. What are some interesting things about Elijah and Elisha? We don't need to cover the whole history of each person, but let's just make sure we kind of have them in context to go through our Bible study.
Well, they were two of the most notable prophets serving in the northern kingdom of Israel, helping to restore Israel. Something that I read that I didn't realize before, Elisha was 25 years old when Elijah was taken up by God, and then he served 50 years after that.
That is interesting. Thank you.
This was also interesting to me. It said, I never knew that. It said that because Elisha asked for the double portion of Elijah's spirit, he performed twice as much miracles as Elijah.
Yeah.
I never come across that before.
Yeah, that was good.
Elisha, first of all, was a student of Elijah.
Yes.
One of many, many, many students that Elijah had. Elijah was the prophet of fire, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was the one who challenged all the prophets of Baal, set up the altar, and had water poured on it. That whoever's God lights this fire is the real God. He performed that. Fire came down when he called on the real God.
And burned up the water.
And a lot of people were offended by him because he was so outspoken, kind of gruff looking.
As we learned later on in the story, however, it was revealed that there was a remnant that saw what Elijah did, and it helped them. Even though there were many that were offended, there were many quiet ones that respected what he did and stood for.
There's always that remnant. Why there's never any reason for discouragement. There, it's working.
Yeah, didn't he say there were 7,000 you don't know about? I was thinking of that. Are there 7,000 in every country that are going to come to this church?
Something big.
Like 195 countries that have come to the church. So.
Yeah.
It was interesting. It was the loud ones that were offended by him. It was the quiet ones that quietly took it into heart. They were the remnant. Were benefited by it.
And you know, this idea of apprenticeship was in the Bible. I think it's the best way to learn now. To learn by watching and doing. Certainly how we learned here from Mrs. Evans. We learned directly from Mrs. Evans. Certainly the disciples learned from Jesus. And Elisha learned from Elijah.
And when Elijah told all of his students to leave him alone, because he had to go somewhere, Elisha refused, didn't he?
He would not leave them.
I will not leave you.
No.
That cool, huh?
He valued his life example and his teaching so much.
All of these were tests for Elisha. And he passed them all. Certainly by not leaving, especially everyone was telling him to leave, including Elijah. But he was listening to the Father, doing as the Father bid him, not what people were telling him. And it said that he was called to the ministry while he was faithfully doing his secular duties. So he had another occupation that he was doing when he was called forth by God for his faithfulness, just as we know Jesus was a what?
Carpenter.
And a good carpenter. And he did many years, Elisha, doing menial jobs for Elijah. Another sign of faithfulness. I'm sure he wasn't necessarily planning that he was going to one day be a great healer and prophet. He just loved, and so he did menial jobs. I know those of us here have done menial jobs for many, many years without pay, without expectation of reward. These are the tests, and I don't know whether I've seen so much of it as clearly as I do now, and in reading about Elisha and how he was tested the way he was. He never backed off or gave in. He just kept quietly doing. And then look what he was able to accomplish later. But he couldn't have accomplished it if he hadn't been tested and tried. We will get on with it, but we will see that huge contrast with Gehazi. Because Gehazi was a servant. he followed Elisha. He could have been learning many, many things, just as Elisha learned from Elijah. But that story turns out quite different.
Martha Wilcox has a section for Elijah and Elisha, and she says, quote, after Moses, Elijah and Elisha followed in succession in the divine development of the Immaculate Conception. And then she talks about some of the healings. And then I thought this line was interesting. She also says, these prophets set out or established the method or technique for all metaphysical healing throughout time. And then she spends the rest of the paragraph talking about their healings and how they apply to healing work. And that's page 346 to 348 in addresses.
Thank you.
I thought, too, about being faithful over a few things.
Absolutely. Made rulers over many. And in all of these examples, in the examples of the early workers, those who stayed in Mrs. Eddy's home, that Mrs. Wilcox speaks of that, what Barbara just quoted, being faithful over a few things. They were washing her clothes, making her food, her clothes, doing all the menial tasks. And in doing those menial tasks, they were learning how to demonstrate. They were faithful in each of those tasks. And what did Mrs. Eddy say? In coming to her home, they were, I forget how she put it, but light years ahead of those who stayed back.
They would learn more science in 1 year in her home than anybody out in the field could learn in 50 years.
Bill Carpenter should prove that.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
And he was living proof of it.
1 year in her home, and look at the books that he's written. Inspired books. But you have to be willing to come under that discipline, and it is a discipline. And sometimes it's not easy. And it is always this death self. But look what it reaps. Benefits that come from it. So.
And we're probably all faithful to something. I mean, you have to have faith in something to keep going, right?
Well, I was just thinking that to me, it was not having the hope that I have here certainly was less easy doing that life.
Exactly.
Having the purpose and the hope here is wonderful.
So for me, I find it's helpful to think, well, what do I actually have faith in? Do I have faith in the truth? Do I have faith in love? Do I have faith in the science? Or do I put faith in other things? And I think that that's what our topic's all about. Because whatever you have faith in, you're going to treasure it. You're going to be faithful to it. And your life will show what it is that you actually have faith in.
One of the commentaries, I thought this was very good and rather deep. It brought out Elisha's faithfulness and says there are various stages in our spiritual development at which God tests us to see whether we are satisfied with what we have already received or whether we will press on to God's highest. says the first one is Gilgal, and it stands for the place where our sins are forgiven. He goes on about it, but then he says many Christians get thus far and stop there. You know, you get accept the Christ, your sins are forgiven, and then you stop there. Then he said the second, some press on until Bethel, meaning of that is the house of God, which stands for fellowship with believers in the family of God. So you can come to a church, then you stop there in your growth. Then he says, but a few go still further to Jericho, which stands for the manifestation of the supernatural power of God. Talks about the Jericho and the walls coming down. And then he said, this is as far as most Christians ever go. You have some victories. And then, again, very, very few go all the way to Jordan, which stands for identification with Christ in his death, as symbolized in the baptism. Very, very few are willing to walk the way of the cross. And then it says, the new and living way that Jesus has inaugurated us through his flesh. But it is these few who are wholehearted enough to press on to total death to self and who receive the double portion, God's best. All of us are being tested today as to what stage we will stop at. So if you feel you're being tested, you feel maybe that things haven't worked out the way you would like them or the way you had planned, they probably are being tested. Will you remain faithful? Are you willing to go the whole way? You're just going to stop in a pleasant sense of going to church on Sundays? Or are you going to keep going, no matter how rough the road? Because if you do, you will get a double portion. That is God's best. And it is what Elisha did and what Gehazi did not.
Finish the course with joy.
Finish the course with joy, yes. You're advancing spiritually. I had that statement in Science and Health circled many times in my full text too. And the steps to getting there. And also then rejoicing all the way. Shepherd, show me how to go. O'er the hillside see. How to gather, how to sow. How to feed my sheep. Mrs. Eddy knew this path. She trotted, as did Christ Jesus. We are saying that we will or want to, but can't just talk the talk. You have to walk the walk.
It sounds very practical to us, though. So are we just here for the loaves and fishes, or do we persevere to know, to understand, even, for example, why a healing took place, so that next time error rears its head, we can have some understanding that gives us dominion over it?
Yes. And that's just what the morning quote was about, when you obtain the spiritual understanding of its promises. The ones in the Bible, the ones that we have had. Mrs. Eddy says everyone has to work up to the level of the practitioner. You can't just keep crying out for that magic wand. Especially when you name the name of science, and I think especially in these days, because we've had so many healings, and you know it, over and over and over, the quick, almost magical healings, miraculous healings, they never are, and that's what people always want. But where did it leave cause science? If you really are healing, then there's much greater growth than the magic wand type, where you haven't learned anything.
That was just Linda. I was just going to add where Jesus we just had recent where we read, he said that no more signs were going to be given to
Thank
this
you.
generation.
Yeah. We've had the signs.
They're all recorded in the Bible and in our textbook
Absolutely.
and in Carpenter's writings and in Eustace's writings. They're all over.
Biographies of Mrs. Eddy. So if you still doubt or you believe it's not true, well, then look within. Don't look for more signs. Look within.
So I thought I'd ask a quick Sunday school question, all right? It could be a quick answer. So who was it? Was it Elijah or Elisha who was at the transfiguration with Jesus?
Elijah.
I thought it was Elijah.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Told him Elias.
Quick answer to a quick question. So now our second question is, and this is coming from our lesson. We have two stories, one about the widow and the other about Gehazi. And if someone knows how to pronounce Gehazi, that can jump in right now.
Carol, barely. Gehazi. Gehazi is how I said it.
Okay, Gehazi, I thought.
Gehazi. Yeah, you're right.
Gehazi.
Yeah.
Okay. So, in reading these two stories, how would you contrast these two different people? What do we learn from them?
Well, I like that the widow woman in her extremity, I mean, here she is, like, getting ready to eat the last of her food, and and Elijah asked her to make a cake for him first, but then before she went, he also reassured her that things would be taken care of by God, and she listened and had faith and obeyed and did what he asked, and indeed they did eat off the meal and the oil for many days. And then Gehazi had his needs met, and he wanted more, and didn't understand what Elisha was trying to teach, both to Naaman and as well to him. And he didn't get the lesson, and instead he got the curse.
She had given up trying to preserve her mortal belief of self.
Thank you.
And she recognized the Christ in Elisha and respected his relationship with God enough that she followed without questioning.
Even though my understanding is she didn't know him, spiritual sense was certainly operating. She had every reason. I mean, she just lost her husband. She was widowed. A terrible drought. I guess a lot of people were dying. But maybe sometimes when you reach rock bottom, the only way is up, right? So that's why reaching rock bottom is usually a good thing, especially if you're wrestling with a lot of pride and doubt. And finally, when you just say, okay, God, I can't do this. I am just nothing without you, and really mean it. Then you can rise up. God will send what you need to aid you in that rising up. But Mrs. Eddy has said, well, how long does this period last? What does she say about it?
Depends upon sins of duress.
Sometimes chronic,
Thank you.
or often acute.
Yep. And Bruce, then,
Sins of duress.
yeah, and sometimes it takes many cycles So if you keep, I call it being a piece of sea glass that gets thrown back in the ocean and tumbled around until you get refined, until it gets so bad. But remember, error never hangs on to you, but what?
You hang on to it.
You hang on to it.
You're hanging on to it.
That's what Mrs. Eddy refers to as the tenacity of error.
Aggressive animal magnetism. That's why you have to have that little bit of kick and fight back. Sometimes not a little bit, sometimes a lot.
One thing that struck me about this was the continual discussion we've had of needs versus wants. God supplies our needs. Our great need, of course, is to obey Him. It was so clear that Gehazi was in the grips of his wants. And that's a very destructive place to go.
Yes,
I think he's an okay.
Oh, go ahead.
No, he's an example of material dissatisfaction because he had, but still wasn't satisfied, wanting more and more and more. And so it's clear that only spiritually are we satisfied.
Yeah, he still had a really strong sense of his mortal being, didn't he?
Yeah,
He was still trying to satisfy his mortality, his mortal body, what he thought was his true self.
So he was willing to lie to get what he saw was there.
And that's what mortal belief is all about, isn't it? Mrs. Eddy refers to it as an enigma.
And it's in the lesson.
It's a problem without a solution.
I can cheat, lie, commit adultery, rob, murder, smooth-tongued villainy. If you're in the wrong mind, that's what you'll do. And you see, we've seen that this week, haven't we, with this big college scam thing? How much money do people need? And yet now they're going to lie and do all this to get their children into
into schools that they don't belong to go to anyway in the first place,
and not even worried about going to. They don't care about going.
So
it's all for nothing.
It's the absurdity of the human mind, and if you're in it, then get out of it because it leads to nothing good.
You'll never be satisfied too, anyway. Never.
Never.
Acquiring, yeah.
All they had, and they still had to have more, so they cheat, lie, do all this to get what they want. And they go out. Last week, it was the Ten Commandments. We talked about the Ten Commandments. Living those rules keeps you safe, keeps you in the right mind. Out of it, you're liable to anything. And the theme of this Saturday session is where your heart is, there will be your treasure. Well, Gehazi had the wonderful opportunity to be learning from Elisha. And yet, his treasure wasn't there. His treasure was, he wanted the money. It was love of money. And one of the commentaries said that Nahum was an unbeliever and a compromiser, and Elisha would receive nothing from him. The fact that Nahum was a compromiser is clearly seen in what he said to Elisha after he had been healed. He said that he was compelled to worship idols because of his official position. Nahum knew that idolatry was wrong, but he was unwilling to sacrifice his job for the sake of the truth, just like many today.
Did anybody ever wonder why Elisha was unwilling to accept compensation for something that he'd done?
Well,
that's why he refused it. He was not going to play along or satisfy a compromised state of thought. It wasn't the it wasn't the money that he was offered. It was the state of thought that he wasn't going to placate.
Naaman was going to buy it, right?
He wasn't going to allow Naaman to think that he could purchase God's gifts with money.
It was an abomination to Elisha.
Did anybody read that story about Simon? What did he want to do?
Well, the same thing, exactly.
Yeah. He wanted to pay money to receive the power of the Holy Ghost.
Yeah. He wanted to be taught how to heal. He was willing to say anything.
No one ever tried to pay Christ, to pay Jesus.
Well, they tried to impress him, though. I mean, Simon, and inviting him and whatever, the meals, stuff that they did. I think maybe not in money, but somehow to impress him.
Yeah, that's it. The worldliness is also in this lesson. That's what they're all wrapped up in. And this worldliness does not see the Christ at all. Here, Elisha had this wonderful opportunity, Gehazi had a wonderful opportunity to learn firsthand from Elisha, as Elisha learned from Elijah. But he was too materially minded. And so instead of getting a double portion of Elisha's spirit, what did he get?
Leprosy.
Yeah.
Double portion of leprosy. So, what I think is interesting, Gehazi, compared to the widow, is the widow strikes me as like just ordinary person going about an ordinary life, okay? But Gehazi, he was a servant of Elisha, and he kind of had some responsibility. He had a position. And when you have a position with responsibility, there's kind of an extra burden there for what you need to do. And he, very typical. I mean, you brought up this story about people paying, the bribing and so forth to get their kids in school. Well, who was receiving those bribes? Those were people of position. And when you're in a certain position, you have an extra responsibility. It isn't all just glory for yourself. I mean, you're taking on a huge responsibility. You need to think about that, not yourself.
Thank you. It's very, very true. I mean, they were equally responsible.
If he had really been learning anything from Elisha, he would have been a good example.
Would have. And he wouldn't have been so tempted. Or he would have questioned, well, if Elisha didn't want it, then I certainly don't want it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't understand why Elisha didn't want it.
And he didn't have the patience to
find out.
Wait and figure out why.
Well, it shows also how variable the human mind is, because Gehazi had been very faithful. Back in the story, when he suggested to the prophet that the widow woman, not the widow woman, but the woman that had no child, the Shunammite woman, had no child, and the prophet wanted to repay her in some way for her kindness, and he told him about that they had no children, and that was a very good thing that he did. So, he was very faithful in that instance.
He was, and there were other instances, I believe, where he was. But he broke down in this. It was a big breaking down.
And he had all the signs. I mean, he saw the miracles that Elijah did, but so much for that.
There again, the signs. What good are the signs? The signs aren't any good unless you seek the spiritual understanding of his promise.
shows the impersonal nature of it all. Obviously, there were times when he was led by the spirit of compassion and love for his fellow man. And another time when he allowed this greed thing to get a grip on him and manipulate him.
And I think that goes to our watching point this week, too, where, you can be in the divine mind a lot of the time, but then, whoops.
They'll be tempted.
Yep. I go back to why Frederick Dixon said only the pure in heart can survive these latter days, because the temptations will come, and they will come tailor-made, and you are being tested. You really want the double portion of God's Spirit, or you're just going to go to the ways of worldliness and flesh. Now, to get to the widow woman, and at least two of you wrote on the forum, one was Linda and one was Suzanne, about first fruits. And what is that?
That's how we are to give from our first fruits.
Putting God first.
Yeah,
it's the priority in our lives. It's what's in our heart. It's what we treasure.
So if you spend, for instance, all your money on all of the things that you need to do, and then say, "Oh, I
got 10 cents left over for church."
Yep.
Yeah.
No, you give to church first, or the symbol of God, whatever church, whatever that is to you, and then you spend the rest. That's the first fruit, and the widow did that. All that she had, she gave. She didn't have much. She gave it all, talk about the widow's mite. And she didn't say no, and she questioned a little bit, but she obeyed it. And you have to have that faith and understanding, and these are rules and laws and principles of the universe. And one of the questions is, how do you receive God's blessing? Well, this is a really big one in every lesson on substance, just about, that we have. And how many are willing to do that, to give their first fruits? Because it takes a tremendous amount of trust, especially when you think you don't have it.
We're just going to go back to Malachi, where the statement is, "Bring tithes into my storehouse, so there's meat in my house. And I will pour you out a blessing that you can't receive it all."
You? And
it takes courage, too.
It does. But then when you do it, you find out the truth of the principle. But you have to do it from the right motive, not because you're afraid.
And what's the principle behind all this? Is God's love finite for us?
No.
Is good finite?
No.
And is our substance spiritual?
Entirely so.
And is there ever a limited amount of it?
Infinite.
No. So when we put God's spiritual laws first in our heart and resist the temptation to worship anything human or material, God's abundance pours through. When we give to others as God directs, He gives us more so that we can continue to do so. When we selfishly want for ourselves, all of a sudden the giving dries up. Guess what?
Everything else dries too.
Everything, yeah. And this goes back to what Thomas said about there's a responsibility. When God's abundance comes, there's a responsibility to pour it forth to bless His children.
As he directs.
As he directs. Not in a do-goody way, but as he directs. And failure to do that will put the streams of love, another hymn.
Make channels, yeah.
Yes, make channels for the streams of love.
So this is straight out of our lesson this week. It says here, blessed is that man who seeth his brother's need and supplieth it.
Yeah.
So blessed is that man who does that.
Who seeth his brother's need. Need, not want, but need.
So, so I think we've started talking about question 3, so that's good. So if you find other things in the lesson this week, help us understand that, please speak up.
I just wanted to add one more quick thing about Gehazi that stood out to me was that he really interfered with the treatment when he did that, and more healing that could have gone on. Because he really kind of stepped in between the practitioner and patient when he did that.
Most certainly did.
I'd like, before we just leave it, I'd like to read something that I just read recently in Miscellany. Is that okay? On page 231 of Miscellany, there's a short article entitled Charity and Invalids on this subject of giving to others. Mrs. Eddy endeavors to bestow her charities for such purposes only as God indicates. Giving merely in compliance with solicitations or petitions from strangers incurs the liability of working in wrong directions. As a rule, she has suffered most from those whom she has labored much to benefit. Also from the undeserving poor to whom she has given large sums of money, worse than wasted. She has, therefore, finally resolved to spend no more time or money in such uncertain and fortunate investments. She has qualified students for healing the sick and has ceased practice herself in order to help God's work in other of its highest and infinite meanings, as God, not man, directs. Hence, letters from invalids demanding her help do not reach her. They are committed to the wastebasket by her secretaries. Charity suffereth long and is kind, but wisdom must govern charity. Else love's labor is lost, and giving is unkind. As it is, Mrs. Eddy is constantly receiving more important demands on her time and attention than one woman is sufficient to supply. It would therefore be as unwise for her to undertake new tasks as for a landlord who has not an empty apartment in his house to receive more tenants. Wisdom must govern charity. I just leave that with everyone.
That is wonderful.
Thank you.
Website. That is so good. Thank you. Says it all. And there are many. They do demand healing. They just want healing for the loaves and the fishes. And that gets where it gets old fast. And it gets where really, in some ways, they're not healable or unreachable because, that's interesting. They went into the trash basket.
But it's blessed who knows his brother's need. And it requires clear spiritual sense to know what a person really needs. Because they will often ask you what they want, but they will not tell you what they need.
Exactly. Boy, is that ever true.
Well, sometimes they won't stay long enough to even see what they need. You just, I came for this, you didn't give me, I'm gone. So
they want the quick. We call it the quick fix. Quick fix.
Unfortunately, I can identify with Gehazi, and I think this is one of the evils of all this erasure of Mrs. Eddy's life and the reality of what happened in the movement, because I never realized until here in Plainfield how absolutely, I mean, I understood it was difficult, but it was almost impossible. In one of the readings I was given by Linda, thank you very much, there was a statement that Mrs. Eddy made was that she never did the absolute right. She always had to choose the lesser of two evils because all of the students weren't up to the level of absolute right. So by glossing over the whole thing, I've had this view of Christian Science that it's always a ladder going up, and, you know, there's never any bumps in the road like I had when I was, you know, without God and the Christian Science. So I think I just find it so difficult for to convert, you know, so I can see myself being a Gehazi because it's been so hard for me to convert to spiritual, even though I think I'm doing it, if that makes any sense. Sorry.
Mrs. Eddy says the warfare with oneself is grand. So, welcome aboard. I'd be surprised if there's anybody on this call that doesn't identify with Gehazi in one way or another.
Thank you, and that was exactly my point, was that we can, it's easy for me to criticize him, but now I understand finally that I'm living his life.
Well, and it was easy for us to criticize the board of directors in Boston when they sued us, but we had to overcome that also, because they're in a tough position. And would we do the same if we were in their position? Would we do differently? I don't know. But let us not judge, lest we be judged.
Well, actually, you've already proved that, because you could have sided with the board and you didn't. So obviously you stood up against it. Congratulations.
But the criticism is not against people. It's against the motivation that drives people either one way or the other. So
it's also a learning from what we could be led to do, which we shouldn't do. So.
And if you can see yourself in Gehazi, well, that's a good thing. Then that means you can
learn and grow.
Yeah, learn and grow.
Yeah.
And when Gehazi did what he did Elisha say, "Oh, my dear friend, you've been so helpful to me all these years, I will forgive you"? No. He wasn't personal about it either.
But on the other hand, he wasn't also condemning him because he didn't create the leprosy. He just foresaw what was going to happen, and that doesn't mean Gehazi couldn't work his way out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So that's the beauty of it all. That's what I'm understanding here now, and why it's so wrong to gloss over everything, because, you know, everybody does have battles, and if you pretend you don't, then that's where I got stuck, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, later in second, go ahead.
If you pretend you don't, you're going to lose them all.
you're also dishonest.
And Linda?
I was just going to mention in 2 Kings 8, which is later, afterward, Gehazi is back in the story where he's talking to a king and talking about the beautiful things that Elisha had done. So he's even possibly healed, because if he's talking to the king, he couldn't be contagious at that point, which I think lepers were outcast.
Yes.
Yes.
But he does at least speak for a woman and helps her in this point later on.
That's good.
Was he identified by name at that point?
What was the question?
Or was he identified by name? Because I know.
Yes, it says, and the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, "Tell me, I pray thee, all the great things that Elisha had done."
That is awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
2 Kings 8:4.
I just wanted to say what Mike brought up earlier about Mrs. Eddy having to give her students what they could handle. I just read in Collectania yesterday, she said, sometimes I want to tell my students, hurry up.
I'm very grateful that God waits around for me to wake up and realize what it is that I need to be doing.
Yes. Wonderful. We get endless opportunities to change.
And what a wonderful example for us on how to love one another patiently.
Patient.
Mm-hmm.
And persistent.
So, I want to mention, this is from the lesson, I think, about Gehazi. Mary Baker Eddy writes, the objects we pursue and the spirit we manifest reveal our standpoint. So if you think of Gehazi, I mean, he's a servant of Elijah. And was he pursuing what he could learn from him as a servant? Obviously not.
Well, it's a little like people pursuing Christian Science so they can live a comfortable life, right?
Right.
I'm going to pursue Christian Science because I need a healing.
But it also could be a mistaken identity, because that was one of the traps that I fell in when I wasn't understanding. I absolutely looked to my body for healing, thinking that if I was getting healing, that was step number one, and then healing the world was, and all the sin was step number two. And now I realize that I ingrained for years into myself looking at my body, and now it's so hard to break that thing. And that was completely false. And where did I get that from? I don't know. I mean, did I invent it myself, or did other Christian scientists kind of get me on the wrong track? I can't blame them. I have to accept the responsibility. So I just think it's really so hard to really pinpoint, and I'm, glad for the discussion so we can sort through it and approach it from whatever direction we feel that we're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it's the mortal beliefs are all around us, aren't they? I mean, they're aggressive. I mean, it's law. It's human law.
Well, and I think it was commonly thought, I know I thought too, Christian Science, you did come, you came for healing. But, again, in this week's lesson, an answer of how do you gain God's blessing, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Now, I was a Christian Scientist for a long time before that finally dawned on me that I'm not seeking the physical healing. I'm seeking God and his righteousness. And when I do seek that, all the other things do fall into place, because it's usually correct identification, correct vision, knowing who and what God is, and you as me as God's child, and the false concepts fall away. They were never true in the first place, but seek God first in the understanding. Again, what our original understanding of his promises, the understanding of God, and in seeking those, these other things come, but only as byproducts. And as you seek him and find out the wondrous glory of seeking him and knowing him and having him as your best and ever friend, the byproducts take a different place in your thought. They are not as important as what you once thought they were. And that's why you don't have a conflict with, well, should I follow Elisha and the truth, or should I just run after the money? Because you know that the truth is what satisfies and brings healing. And the money, the love of money drops away. It no longer has that glitter to it. Because we know, I mean, look at these people who have committed this scam, you can have a lot of money and still be mixed up, confused, and miserable without God.
In fact, often it's the way.
Often it is the way.
The wealthier people are, the more of a burden it is to them. Unless they recognize it as of God and are directed by God as to what to do with it. Then it's a joy.
So why do you want your health? Want it just to, have a great time here on earth? Party? Or is it to glorify God? Health is a quality of God. It's not a quality of matter. It's of God. As you're obeying Him and living that best life you can, health naturally comes, as does joy and peace. Supply, definitely, all good things as byproducts.
Mrs. Eddy's article on body talks about that, like the intermediate step that makes it a warfare in yourself, and then you move on to know it's just from God.
So there were those things I pointed out, they both came from the Bible, but in Science and Health, how do you get heavenly riches? Mortal man achieves no worldly honors except by sacrifice, so he must gain heavenly riches by forsaking all worldliness. Then he will have nothing in common with the worldly affections, motives, and aims. These are tough things. These aren't easy. Are you willing to do this? And then if not, don't complain that Christian Science doesn't work for you. Just say, okay, I don't want to do it. Be honest.
Wrestle well with honesty.
And then the last one, which I love so much, if the disciple is advancing spiritually, he is striving to enter in. He constantly turns away from material sense. He looks towards the imperishable things of spirit. If honest, he will be earnest from the start. Gain a little each day in the right direction, till at last finishes his course with joy. Those are all doable, by the way. You can write those lists down and think about it when you go to bed tonight. Have you done this? Have you looked away from material sense? Or are you looking more toward the imperishable things of spirit? Have you been honest? Are you earnest? What have you gained today? That's not too much to ask. Doable.
And we are all being tested every day.
Each testing makes you go stronger.
If you pass the test.
Yes. And we will continue to have the Ten Commandments taught, because this idea, thou shalt not covet. One of the commentaries said how so much trouble in the Bible all started by coveting, wanting what someone else has. There's a story, I have to read it, but it was about someone named Achan, Achan. And he said, he described his fall as thus: I saw, I coveted, I took, I hid. Joshua 7:21. I saw, I coveted, I took, I hid. I want my child to go into that school. I'm gonna see how I can do it, and then I'm gonna hide it from everybody. Whoops.
There is nothing hid that shall not be revealed.
Yes. And where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. If your heart is really with God, and you're living those commandments in Sermon on the Mount, you couldn't do that.
So that quote works both ways. Where your heart is, there will your treasure be. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be. They will be one and the same.
So thank you, Thomas. Anyone else who wants to speak?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a blessed day.
Thank you.